Dinesh Singh join कर लें.
Yes, we are
Minute
joined.
है
Yes,
अभी.
ma'am. Over to Professor Anita Verma, ma'am. Please start.
Okay जी. A very good evening and a very warm welcome on the behalf of Department of Mathematics. A very warm welcome to our distinguished guests, our distinguished speakers, our faculty members and students on the occasion of this two-day workshop on life, work and legacy of Srinivasa Ramanujan. Now I request Professor Gurneet Kaur Bakshi, our chairperson, to give the welcome address. So, thank you, madam. So, on behalf of Mathematics Department at Punjab University, it's my pleasant duty and great privilege to welcome all of you to this event today, and which is being held to pay tribute to Srinivasa Ramanujan on his 100th death anniversary. And so my sincere thanks, first of all, to the speakers of this event, Professor Dinesh Singh, Professor George Andrews, and Professor A.K. Agarwal for accepting our invitation. And so you will be introduced to the speakers later on when the talks come. And so we are here today to pay tribute to the Indian genius, Srinivasa Ramanujan. So let me tell you, although he is well known for his mathematics, he was a self-taught mathematician who contributed to the theory of numbers. And he died very young. Born in Tamil Nadu in 1887, Ramanujan grew up in poverty. His father was just an accounting clerk and mother was just earning a small amount as a singer in a temple. And so the mathematician died in April 1920, and so we are here today after 100 years to pay tribute to him. And let me recall some brief facts about Ramanujan. You will hear a lot about Ramanujan, about his life, the kind of life he led in the lecture by and he has really made India proud. And let me recall a brief fact that Ramanujan grew up in poverty, and so much of poverty that he survived on minimal food. And he did not have money even to buy papers to write down. So he used to write on slates and used to rub on the elbow. And so he obtained the scholarship from the University of Madras, but he ended up losing it because he neglected all other studies except mathematics. So because of that, he had to lose that scholarship. And with a little formal training in mathematics, Ramanujan published his first paper in the Indian Journal of Indian Math Society. And he started communicating with Hardy and British mathematician, and this led him to obtaining a scholarship from the university, Trinity College, Cambridge, and later on he traveled to England to work there. So you will hear a lot about it during these lectures. And after his advances, especially in the field of partition theory, his publication of his papers in several English and European journals, he was elected as a fellow of the Royal Society of London and made India proud with his contributions. So, and since several new students of the department have joined us today, and so it is also important for me to introduce them to the department where they've got admitted. This is a very, very old department in India, Department of Mathematics. Punjab University was established in 1952 at Hoshiarpur after partition and was shifted to Chandigarh in 1958. And it has grown to be one of the best departments of mathematics in Indian universities. The department is recognized as a center for advanced study in mathematics since 1963 by UGC. And the Department of Science and Technology also supports the department under the FIST program. And the department has a regional library supported by National Board for Higher Mathematics. It's a regional center for Olympiads. It's a regional center for National Board of Higher Mathematics scholarships, which are very, very prestigious scholarships in India for undergraduate, for postgraduate studies and postdoctoral studies in mathematics. So the faculty of the department is bestowed with various honors awards like Padma Bhushan, Srinivasa Ramanujan Medal of INSA, ISKA, Meghnad Saha Award, Bhatnagar Awardee, Fellows of the 3 academies, and so on. And most faculty members are very active in research and collaborate with international community. So as you have seen in the poster that this program is in participation with collaboration with National Academy of Sciences, India, and SPSTI, Science Society for Promotion of Science and Technology in India. So let me tell you briefly about National Academy of Sciences. For SPSTI, we have a president, Mr. Dharamveer here of SPSTI. He will tell you more about SPSTI. So let me tell you about National Academy of Sciences. It's NASI, abbreviated as NASI. It's the oldest science academy in India. And it came into existence after the First World War, when there was poverty, there was hunger, economic depression, and setback to scientific community. And so a forum was created by Professor Meghnad Saha, physicist, so that the scientists can come under one roof and look for the problems faced by scientists and other. So this academy has that objective, and there are various chapters of the academy throughout India. And Chandigarh chapter of the academy is one of the chapters. And Professor Pasi, who has also joined us, and he is the president of the Chandigarh chapter. And we are thankful to him for sponsoring this event. And this is the objective of the academy. And so we have also the president of SPSTI. So he will tell you more about SPSTI. So with these words, let me extend a hearty welcome to all of you, and thank you. Thanks for joining.
Now, thank you, Professor Gurneet, for throwing light on the functions of NASI and telling about the department. Now, I request Shri Dharamveer ji, President of SPSTI, to tell us about SPSTI role. Sir.
Thank you very much. Right at the outset, I welcome Professor Dinesh Singh and all the delegates who are attending the seminar, the lecture on life, work, and legacy of Srinivasa Ramanujan. It is a 2 days event, and we are associated with this. We feel proud of it that we have been associated in holding this
Conference.
Event conference, and we have very distinguished. And one of them who is speaking today is Professor Dinesh Singh. I remember having attended his lecture that we had organized a long time back. In fact, in 2014, we had held his lecture on February 19th, and the title of the lecture was From Indus Valley to Srinivasa Ramanujan, A History of Indian Mathematics. And second was India in the 21st Century, Role of Higher Education, subsequently. The lecture that Professor Dinesh Singh had delivered still inspires us. And I myself wanted to be a mathematician, ended up doing physics, and finally ending up in the IS. Experts like Professor Dinesh Singh inspires students from generation to generation. And perhaps I was also inspired by a person like him, an expert like him, when I was in school, and subsequently when I was doing bachelor and masters in physics. Most of physics I learned was through mathematics, which my wife knows very well, and that was due to the mathematicians. So we are very glad to be associated with this 2 days lecture series on life, work, and legacy of Srinivasa Ramanujan, and we would be happy to contribute any way that we can and we should to promote the legacy of such a great genius, which is who is still relevant in every way in the areas of mathematics. So far as our society is concerned, we hold a large number of we have a very huge basket of activities. One of the premier activity which goes to the students in villages in Haryana is Vigyan Ka Jantar Mantar. It is called Circus of Science. It's a mobile science laboratory which goes from one village to another in a predetermined route, and it is supported by the Department of Science and Technology, Government of India, and we employ 9 persons on this lab, and it goes from, as I said, from village to village, school to school, in a defined manner. We have a route chart, and they motivate students to learn science through experiments and mathematics. We conduct experiments. Some are in demonstrative mode, some are on. Every student is encouraged to perform a few experiments. And in the evenings, we hold community program to demystify several myths about, let us say, the solar ग्रहण जिसे हम कहते हैं, eclipses. There are a lot of myths associated with eclipse, and so on and so forth. So our lab tends to generate some kind of scientific bent of mind to create curiosity about science, to understand the daily happenings through science, and that is demystification through science and technology. We also hold regularly summer schools in science and mathematics. We have added emphasis on mathematics because one of the subjects which students, two subjects the students fear in government schools are mathematics and physics. So we try to demystify both the subjects through the summer schools, how they should be learned, how these subjects should be learned. In the age of competitive examinations engineered by the joint entrance examinations, we tend to fear most of the students do not go to school to the schools to attend the regular classes in class 11 and 12 and prefer to go to the coaching classes. So we try to tell them that they cannot crack any entrance examination unless they understand the fundamentals. And so we engage students of IITs, ICERs, Delhi University, Punjab University, and other distinguished colleges and universities to come and teach during the summer camps. And we are proud to say that we have been able to inspire a large number of students coming from rural areas or small districts, small towns. So that is another primary activity. Apart from that, we also hold lectures, public lectures, and we take the pride that we have held several lectures in Tego Theatre, which is very well known for the cultural activities. But we are the only organization in the city which has been able to conduct lectures on the subjects covering science and mathematics. And I'm glad to add, Professor Dinesh Singh was one of the speakers when he spoke on from Indus Valley civilization to Srinivasa Ramanujan, and later he also participated in a panel discussion on the role of science and mathematics in the development of India and the growth of India. And in fact, whatever he said is still relevant, and I keep reminding him that he must again come to Chandigarh when lockdown is lifted to speak to our students, young minds. So with this, I'm very happy that we are associated with this event or today's event on life, work, and legacy of Srinivasa Ramanujan. And I would like to request all the people associated with drafting this curriculum. There should be some one or two chapters on Indian mathematicians. Srinivasa Ramanujan is someone whom we can say all-time great genius. But I'm sorry to say that our schools never refer to Ramanujan. So I would request all these academics and scientists to include certain history of mathematics, one chapter on history of mathematics, and especially Indian mathematicians. And our mathematicians are well known worldwide. It's not that we have not made contribution to mathematics in the past, in ancient times. We have been doing it in the 19th century, 20th century. So we must lay emphasis and take pride on teaching mathematics. Finally, I would also request the syllabi makers. Mathematics is as relevant to biology as biology is also relevant to physics and chemistry. So we must have programs, undergraduate programs, in which mathematics is taught to biology, biology is taught to the physics and chemistry graduates. This will help us to make our undergraduate education holistic. I hope NEP also helps this in this direction, but I'm not sure. With the watertight compartments in the universities, it is very difficult to give options of this type that I'm talking about, which is available in the foreign countries, especially the US. So this is with this request, I welcome the today's speakers, Professor Dinesh Singh and Professor Professor George Andrews. I hope he has been able to join and has so I'm told that he would join a little later. So I welcome Professor Dinesh Singh and all the delegates who are attending the session. And thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for telling us about the activities of SPSTI and motivating us more on and put the emphasis on Indian mathematicians and to work more on their contributions. And now I request Professor Sudesh Kaur Khanduja to welcome Professor Dinesh Singh and chair his session. Ma'am, please. Professor Sudesh Kaur Khanduja. I request Professor Sudesh Kaur Khanduja to introduce Professor Dinesh Singh and chair his session.
Thank you, Varita. Dear students, researchers, um, friends and colleagues, welcome to the opening session of the lecture series. Our first speaker is a distinguished mathematician, a great educationist, and administrative genius, and a distinguished mathematician, Professor Dinesh Singh. My acquaintance with Professor Singh goes back to my student days in the mid-70s through his father, late Professor UN Singh, who was also an accomplished mathematician and was head of maths department in University of Delhi at that time. He later joined Allahabad University in 1980 as Vice Chancellor. Professor Dinesh Singh did his BA Honours and MA degrees in Maths from St. Stephen's College, Delhi, and was adjudged the best undergraduate and postgraduate of his batch. In 1981, he completed PhD from Imperial College, London, winning INLAC scholarship under the supervision of Jim Clooney and W.K. Hayman, both students of famous mathematician Littlewood. His areas of specialization include function analysis, operator theory, harmonic analysis. He started his teaching career at St. Stephen College, Delhi in 1981 and later moved to Department of Mathematics, University of Delhi in 1987. He was director, South Campus, University of Delhi from 2005 to 2010. He served as Vice Chancellor of University of Delhi from 2010 to 2015. He retired from this prestigious university in May 2020 and is now Chancellor of K.R. Mangalam University. Besides other reforms, Professor Singh is instrumental in setting up Cluster Innovation Center at University of Delhi. This is an interdisciplinary research center aimed at promoting undergraduate research and is the first of its kind in this country. Professor Singh's career is replete with many awards and honors. He got, I will mention only a few. He got Career Award in Mathematics of University Grants Commission in 1994 and was elected President of Mathematical Sciences Section of the Indian Science Congress Association during its centenary year 2012-13. Also elected President Ramanujan Math Society during 2016 to 19. Prior to this, he was Vice President of this society from 2013 to 15. He's a distinguished fellow of the Hooke Space Imperial College London and has been an adjunct professor of mathematics at the University of Houston. He has numerous honorary doctorates like the ones awarded by University of Edinburgh, University of Houston, National University of Ireland for his distinguished services to the cause of education and research. He was awarded Padma Shri in 2014. He has given several popular lectures on radio, television, and now you can also see some of them on YouTube to promote the cause of mathematics. He's a very powerful orator. Today he will speak on the tragedy and triumph of the life of genius Ramanujan. Sir, Professor Dinesh sir, for lecture, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Khanduja, and thank you to everybody who has been kind enough to give me this opportunity to speak here today, and for the kind words that were said about me. I am sure that all these are extremely good sounding words, and had my father been alive, he would have enjoyed listening to them. But only my mother would have believed these words. Nobody else will believe. But thank you for saying those words about me. I'm delighted to be present to speak on someone who has been a kind of God for all of us from India, particularly, who are connected with mathematics. Ramanujan has held a torch to give us strength, to inspire us, and to show us the way. And in the course of this lecture, I shall try and illustrate the point that I just made about how Ramanujan has been holding this torch for all of us. And while he has held this torch, there are two aspects to his life. There is tragedy and there is triumph. To my mind, the tragedy is sandwiched between triumphs twice. A triumph in the early part of his life, then the tragedy that struck, and then there is this eternal triumph that embodies the spirit of Ramanujan. So I'm trying to see how best I could convey these things, especially as I was told by Dr. Verma that there is a young audience here today, probably students of Punjab University, Chandigarh. No matter what discipline they come from, I think they must imbibe the spirit that emanates from the life and example of Srinivasa Ramanujan. It will do them good. As was mentioned in the introduction by the head of the maths department, that he was born in 1887, in fact, on the 22nd of December, in a small town called Kumbakonam. The town exists till today. His house exists as it is today. It's a modest house. It has been converted into a museum. And the house exists till today. I actually had some photographs that I thought I could show you, but I think, as luck would have it, I'm having trouble getting my internet connection into play here. If I can try once more, if it works with my iPad and I can mirror these images, then you may like to see them. And if it can't, we will just have to look them up on the net. All these images that I was going to show you, in any case, are available on the net. Ramanujan's house has been converted into a museum. I checked some time ago, and I was told that on an average, on a good day, about 10 people visit the museum, which is not bad, I believe, for a town called Kumbakonam, which is a little remote. It is not too far from Chennai. In Ramanujan's days, it was known as Madras. And 10 people visiting on a daily basis seems like a good thing. At least people remember him reasonably well. Ramanujan's life in the beginning was a little hard. He was born into a very poor family. And at age 2, he contracted smallpox. And this is where I would like to mention that Ramanujan's mother, Komlatambal, she had an enormously powerful and impactful role to play in his life, sometimes it did Ramanujan good and sometimes it harmed him. And I'll try and illustrate that as well. So at age 2, when he had smallpox, he would have died. In that district of Thanjavur, 40,000 people died of smallpox that year. So the number was very large. But Ramanujan survived. And to my mind, as little as I've understood, it was Ramanujan's mother who devoted herself completely to the care of Ramanujan to the cost of their financial well-being. As was mentioned a short while earlier, when these lectures were being introduced by the head of the department, it was said that Ramanujan's mother used to sing bhajans in a temple. And for that kind of work, she would be paid a small sum of money. His father was a clerk, a kind of accountancy clerk in a shop in Kumbakonam. Between the two incomes, they could barely make ends meet. But when he fell ill, his mother gave up the singing to devote herself entirely to making sure that Ramanujan recovers, and recover he did. He had smallpox scars for the rest of his life, but he had recovered. There are other things that are notable about Ramanujan at this stage. Beyond 3 years of age, Ramanujan had still not begun to speak. And his mother got worried about that. So she took him to her father. And her father spread grains of rice on the floor, took a piece of stick, and began to carve the letters of the Tamil alphabet on the rice. And something clicked. And Ramanujan began to speak, read, and write. And sure enough, he soon returned back to his parental home, and he was enrolled in the school at Kumbakonam. But I also want to mention that Ramanujan did not really like going to school. This is something we need to think about. I know of many such students who are fairly good at an early age. They are quite phenomenal in terms of their intellectual capacity, but they do not take kindly to school. And when I look at Ramanujan's life, his experiences at school were a mixed bag. He was very willful, very strong-willed. And sometimes he would refuse to go to school. Sometimes he would walk out of school. And I'm not sure if when we adopted the British system of sending our children to school at an early age, whether that was a wise thing or not. Up until some time ago, if you wanted a child to be admitted to a school in Delhi, you would take the child at age about 3, and the school would interview the child. I know that Einstein could not speak till he had crossed the age of 4. Ramanujan could not speak even after the age. So such schools are actually eliminating all potential Ramanujans and Einsteins. Just imagine, they only used to admit after interviewing the child. I'm not sure what they do now. I'm told there was a legal court intervention and probably those kinds of interviews have now been abolished. But for such a long time, we excluded all potential Ramanujans and Einsteins from schools. Let's leave that aside for the moment and we move on with the life of Ramanujan. He was quite curious. He had intellectual curiosity at a very young age. He used to ask very interesting questions. I'm told that one of the questions that he asked quite often was, who was the first human being on earth? I mean, for a young child to ask questions like that, or he would ask questions about what could be the potential distance between two cloud formations up in the sky. Those questions were pretty interesting for Ramanujan to ask. Also, in his early years in school, he was doing quite well in his studies. He was smart, he was intelligent. It wasn't just mathematics. I think at some district level examination, maybe at the end of the primary school or middle school, Ramanujan scored the highest in the whole district, if I'm not mistaken. So he was doing quite well. But around the time he entered high school, maybe a year or two after entering high school, he came across this book, Carr's Synopsis of Mathematics. In today's parlance, it is really just to help a student do well at entrance examinations. It just covers mathematics in very brief, cursory fashion by stating results, mostly without proofs. Even if proofs are mentioned, they are mentioned in very cryptic form. But it covers a fair amount of mathematics at a certain level beyond high school. And this book sparked something inside Ramanujan. I strongly believe that each one of us is born with a drumbeat within. I call it the drumbeat of the soul or antardhvani. Our purpose in life, if we talk of education, is only and only to discover this drumbeat and then march in harmony in the real world with this drumbeat. Most of us spend a whole lifetime trying to figure what this drumbeat is. But those who can are the ones who begin to get truly educated. Sachin Tendulkar discovered the drumbeat of cricket, and through that, his path to education went ahead. This happened to Ramanujan when he came across Carr's synopsis of mathematics. That drumbeat was awakened, and he harked to that drumbeat and began to march in the real world in harmony with that drumbeat. In other words, he became absorbed in mathematics. The way we describe it with the phrase in Hindi, tan man dhan. He was completely absorbed in mathematics. At this point in time, I must tell you that they were very poor people. And there are occasions at this phase of Ramanujan's life when he did not have enough food at home. And at these moments, his neighbors would take pity on him and they would feed him. So he was going through a fairly hard time. But he was completely devoted to mathematics. And his father realized that this could be harmful for him. So he would frown when he discovered that Ramanujan was spending so much time on mathematics. Ramanujan would not give up. This was called complete devotion. So he would write on a piece of slate, and to hide from his father, he would sit beneath the staircase in the home and quietly on that slate with a piece of chalk keep doing mathematics. This is called complete devotion. Kabir puts it very nicely when he says, Sahib mera ek hai, dujha kaha na jaye. Dujha sahib jo kahu, sahib khada hai sahib. You have to find a master. You have to find your objective. And then you must express complete dedication and complete devotion. At this young age, Ramanujan had already begun to do that. Well, he passed this, I think, what is called the 10th grade examination at Kumbakonam. And then he enrolled into what we now call the +2 level of studies. I think in those days at the Madras area, they were called, I think, FA examinations. Ramanujan enrolled over there, and because he had done well at the school level, he was given a scholarship. But here was Ramanujan completely absorbed in mathematics. Nothing else mattered to him. It did not matter that he would not do well, whether his scholarship would be stopped, whether he would fail. Here he was in Chennai, enrolled in the intermediate or +2 level, completely immersed in mathematics, but he held a scholarship. As luck would have it, he failed the exam, not once, but twice. And then his scholarship was stopped. This is when things became really hard for Ramanujan. This was in the year 1905. For the next 4 years, Ramanujan really struggled, but he would never give up mathematics. All he was trying to do now was 2 things: create his mathematics and get someone to appreciate that, and as a consequence, just give him something so that he could survive and continue to do mathematics. That's all he was looking for. Some kind of subsistence allowance so that he would have the freedom to pursue mathematics. He was not looking for any great figures of money, great recognition, but things were hard and they were going up and down for Ramanujan. There are many reasons for that. he also tutored students so that he could take care of himself. There is a certain tragedy in this already. The tragedy is that by now, Ramanujan had begun to discover results in mathematics which were extraordinarily deep, profound results, connected with series, infinite series, hypergeometric series, and results in number theory. But the problem was that there was no one around who could grasp what Ramanujan had discovered. There were many who felt that he had done something which seemed like it was impressive, but no one could judge. Yet, there were people who were trying to show some kind of sympathy and support for Ramanujan. As things were moving along, his mother decided he needed to get married. And so in 1909, he was married to a very young girl called Janaki. Now that Ramanujan was married, he realized he needs to earn some money. He needs to take care of himself and also his wife. Very soon after he got married, he met the then founder president of the Indian Mathematical Society, Ramaswamy Iyer. And Iyer was very sympathetic. Iyer understood that there is something extraordinary about this man. And Iyer tried his best to help him get support. Actually, he got him a job also, a low-end job, 20 rupees a month as a clerk in the Accountant General's office, something like that. Incidentally, I don't know if people are aware that even C.V. Raman was in the Accountant General's office in Calcutta. That's where he was working, where he actually discovered the Raman effect. So these things do come to your help. Ramanujan had that job, but he lost it very soon. In any case, Iyer and some others encouraged him to apply for another job at the Port Trust in Madras. And he got a clerical job at 30 rupees a month, which was better than the one he had earlier, and was just about enough to take care of him and his wife, and maybe a little support for his parents. So he began to work over there. I must also mention that at this time, his friends had begun to encourage Ramanujan to write to mathematicians. So he first wrote to a mathematician in Bombay, Professor Saldanha, who had studied in London. Saldanha was sympathetic, but again, he was not helpful. As I said, there were two things that were working against Ramanujan and his mathematics at that time. To begin with, the kind of maths he was discovering was beyond the reach of the greatest mathematicians of the world, actually. Why even Saldanha? That was working against him because in India, there weren't enough good mathematicians to look at what he was doing. The second thing that was going against him was that his mathematical training had really been largely through the way Carr had written his book in his synopsis of mathematics, the cryptic fashion in which, without very little explanation, he would put down mathematical statements, facts, and theorems, was what had been embedded inside Ramanujan. And so he was also used to that style and would express himself in that style. That was not the most conducive way to convey your mathematical ideas to somebody else. So then Ramanujan decided, under encouragement from people like Iyer and some others, to write to mathematicians in England. I have something to say about this also. I have always wondered, we were under British rule, and for us, our benchmarks were all measured in terms that the British had set for us. For us, anything that we needed to test, to look at, to create a benchmark or to test against a benchmark, we would look up to the British. And so it seemed natural for Ramanujan to write to British mathematicians. I have wondered what would have happened had he written to German mathematicians. Klein was alive, Hilbert was around. And then had he written to French mathematicians, there was Adamard, there were others. What would have been the result? I have no idea. This remains in the realm of speculation, but it is something worth thinking about. We had that colonial mentality for us. Our colonial masters were the great people, and so he wrote to British mathematicians. There weren't many people in Ramanujan's area in Britain, but yes, there were some. When he first wrote to mathematicians, I think one of them was Hobson. And Hobson didn't really have anything to say. I think there was another mathematician in London University who wrote back. His only comment was that, you could do better with your grammar, but he had nothing to say about his mathematics. Here's something I want the young to acknowledge from Ramanujan's life. See, this is now a big struggle. Now for 10 years, Ramanujan has been trying to convey to people that he likes mathematics, that he thinks he's doing good things in mathematics, and he hasn't met with great success. Now he's an adult, he's married, he has written to mathematicians first in India, professors of mathematics, and then he has written to professors of mathematics in England, and yet he hasn't had any favorable response. Does he give up? He doesn't. He's not discouraged. There is this quiet, sober self-belief in himself that he knows what he is doing is correct and is good. This is a hallmark of those who are truly devoted and who have discovered the drumbeat. If you look at the life of Galva, who died at age 21 in a pistol duel, he knew that he was going to die in that duel. He knew that for the last 4 years of his life, he had tried to convince the best mathematicians of the world in Europe that he had discovered something extraordinary, a corollary of which would solve the burning problem of that century. And yet they had all failed to recognize his work. Did Galva give up? No. Once he gets embroiled in this pistol duel and he knows his adversary is far better than him, he sits down the night before the duel. The duel is to be fought at dawn. He sits at his desk and one last time, he writes to his friend Auguste Chevalier and outlines his entire theory, which is now known as Galva theory. And he says, I leave this to you, show it to Gauss, not as to its truth, but as to its greatness. He was that confident that what he had done had enormous value. In exactly the same way, Ramanujan does not give up. He has this quiet confidence, this stable self-belief. There is no pompousness about him. There is no vanity, but he keeps writing. And when you keep doing that, this is a kind of meditative prayer, this quiet, unvain, without ego, request to others to look at what you are doing because you feel this is good. This is like genuine prayer. And when you do that, eventually your prayers get answered. It is something like Jako Rakhe Saiya Mar Sake Na Koi. And then Ramanujan writes to this Cambridge mathematician, a very well-known mathematician, G.H. Hardy. Hardy records this in a very romantic way. He says the mail arrived in the morning and he opened this letter, and here is this letter written in hand, by hand. Opening lines are something like this. I am a clerk in the Port Trust of Madras. During my spare time, I devote myself to mathematics. I have discovered some results which I believe may be of interest to you, and then so on and so forth. And he outlines the theorems that he has discovered. Hardy looks at them, reads a little, and then puts it aside. These are profound statements. Hardy thinks hard about them, but then he goes off. He plays a game of tennis. He has other engagements. He records in his own words, but the letter kept gnawing away at the back of his mind. Jako Rakhe Saiya. There was God's hand behind Ramanujan. It would not allow Hardy any peace. And Hardy's mind kept dwelling on the letter. That evening, he looked at the letter again, more carefully, and already his subconscious had worked on the letter. And that's when he realized that these seem like the workings of either a crank or a genius. And then he tells himself that even a crank cannot spin out such precise, such balanced, such symmetrical mathematical formulae and expressions. So the person who has given them is a genius of the first order. And he sends for his friend and collaborator Littlewood. And together they go through Ramanujan's results again. And then they realized that there are some results which are rediscoveries. There are results discovered by famous European mathematicians already. But there are some that are completely original and profound, of great import. And from that point onwards, Hardy begins to exert himself fully to get Ramanujan to come to Cambridge. He cannot rest till Ramanujan comes to Cambridge. And Hardy's exertions are with the British government. So he makes arrangements, and therefore Madras University responds and they give him some kind of financial support already now that Hardy is taking interest. That's a pity. You know, I also want to tell you something. There are many young people, as I was told in the audience. That was more than 100 years ago, I think. Yeah, it was. And at that time, Madras University kept feeling this genius who was born once in many centuries. They kept failing him in the intermediate exam. Knowing that he was good at mathematics, they could not exert himself to do much for him. And we pride ourselves now that we have entered the 21st century, that we are now much better, much wiser, hopefully, at least in India. We would like to believe that. But do you know, I have been Vice Chancellor of the University of Delhi, and I checked all the rules and regulations. And because I'm a mathematician, and by God's grace, probably with enough wisdom to recognize a Ramanujan if he comes to me. Just that, nothing more, that I know that this is a God. Yet as Vice Chancellor, I realized I had no power to do anything for Ramanujan. That's the kind of rules and regulations we have had continuously for 100 years. I could not give him a scholarship. I could not admit him into any college, let alone admit him into a PhD program or award him a PhD degree. And I will come back to this in a short while because I want you to understand. In our country, we are fond of forever talking about the great institutions of the West and how we want to be like them. One of them is Cambridge University. Let me tell you a little while later what Cambridge University had done in those days and what Delhi University could not do even today had Ramanujan come to me. I would have been arraigned. I would have had an inquiry against me. How could you admit him? He had failed this. How could you give him a scholarship? Did he sit for the NET exam? Did he clear his JRF? So on and so forth. I would not have been allowed. So we need to think about these things. I dread to think how many Ramanujans we are turning away. I told you, even at the school level, look what we were doing. Unthinking behavior. Unthinking behavior. You want to interview a child when Ramanujans and Einsteins were not even able to speak at that age. Somewhere India needs to sit back and apply its mind and think about such situations. In any case, Ramanujan initially refused to go to Cambridge, but Hardy prevailed. His parental objections were removed and he decided to go to Cambridge. And a critical thing happens now, and this is a point at which his mother plays a very negative role. Ramanujan and his wife wanted to travel together to Cambridge. His wife was a young lady, Janaki, who wished to go with her husband. She was keen, but Ramanujan's mother didn't like that. For some reason, she was insecure and would always prevent Ramanujan developing deep intimacy with his wife. So Ramanujan had to travel away from his land, away from his country, alone. In another age, an age which defines the ethos and the spirit of India, an age which creates a man who has defined, as Iqbal said, the Imam-e-Hind. At that age, another Janki wanted to go with that man when he was banished from his kingdom. And that Janki prevailed. That Janki prevailed, and look how the story goes and how evil is demolished. But this Janaki failed. We could not understand this. Ramanujan's mother played a critical role in not letting her go. And you will soon find how tragic that was. So this is the first of the tragic happenings in Ramanujan's life. He goes over to Cambridge by boat and he lands there, and he very soon he is admitted into apartments in Cambridge. But all this is new for him. This is the year 1914. All this is new for him. Hardy is eager to do maths with him. But the British are generally very formal people. They do not display intimacy or great friendship easily. It's not easy to break that ice with them. And I think this remained with Ramanujan and the relationship with Hardy. He was not used to British ways. He was a vegetarian. So when he was living in his quarters, there were things that were not exactly comfortable for him. Of course, he was not getting the right nourishment. So he would seek spices and that kind of stuff from home, which would arrive by boat. But there were other things. He made friends, by the way, with P.C. Mahalanobis, who was also studying at Cambridge. Mahalanobis, as we know, is the man who founded the Planning Commission and developed the first 5-year plan for India. He was a statistician of great talent. And he became friendly with Ramanujan. And Mahalanobis records in his own words that he realized Ramanujan was uncomfortable. And once he visited Ramanujan in his rooms, and Ramanujan told him that he used to be cold at night and he would sleep with his overcoat on. And then Mahalanobis asked him, why don't you use the blankets? And Ramanujan was unaware that his bed had blankets which were tightly spread on the bed and tucked below the mattress so that you couldn't easily discern that these are blankets. And so the poor man, no one had told him, and he was not used to British ways. And the cold had already begun to affect him. Many things played on him which went against his health. This is one of the things. There were other things that were happening, but let me also tell you that in 1914, when Ramanujan set sail for Cambridge, this man, having worked alone, without access to any journals really worth the name, without access to mathematicians who could match shoulder with him, without all this, single-handedly alone in this small town and then in Chennai, had recreated single-handedly some of the great triumphs of European mathematics that had taken almost 200 years to develop. And time permitting, I will give you a glimpse of one of those gems that he created. That was the power of Srinivasa Ramanujan. And Hardy certainly knew that he was a man of that kind of power. So they began to work together, and Ramanujan had done so much mathematics already before he had reached there that he was trying to acquaint Hardy with that. As luck would have it, because he was not acquainted with the rigors of mathematical analysis, particularly complex analysis, there were flaws in his arguments in number theory, particularly in prime number theory, where he seemed to have done many things. That depressed him. He became demoralized, and he actually tried to commit suicide. He jumped in front of an underground train in London. Fortunately, again, God's hand was on him and he was saved. But there was a kind of demoralization because he realized that all that stuff either was a rediscovery or it was wrong. And again, I hold the British responsible. It was very difficult for Ramanujan to get Hardy to say something in terms of praise for Ramanujan's work. Hardy's praise really springs forth after Ramanujan dies. Of course, in his own way, Hardy already has told Ramanujan, you're special. Why else would he send for him from all the way from India, give him a scholarship, a handsome salary at Cambridge? But sometimes we want some other kinds of reassurance, and it would have helped had Hardy told him, doesn't matter if your work on prime numbers is wrong. That's not because you are wrong. That's because there is some things lacking in your harmony. But that was the other tragic thing that had already occurred in his life. A kind of demoralization and insecurity had set in. But then he went on to do great work with Hardy. They collaborated. They did many marvelous things. And just one of the things that I would like to mention is this formula that discovered for partitions of numbers, an amazing formula. A partition of a number is simply a means of expressing the number as a sum of smaller numbers, such as if I write 3 as 1 plus 2, that's a partition of 3. I could also write 3 as 1 plus 1 plus 1. That's a partition of 3. And 2 plus 1 and 1 plus 2 are the same partitions. If you look at it this way, you will know exactly how many partitions 3 can have. 4, if I remember correctly, has only 5 partitions. But as you go beyond 4 to 10, the number of partitions increases amazingly, phenomenally, almost exponentially in a major way. The number just rises. So 10 will have a very large number of partitions. 20 would be really, really large, and it's hard to imagine. And there doesn't seem to be any pattern to it. But here is Ramanujan invents some method, which is the precursor of the so-called Hardy-Littlewood circle method. Essentially, the germ is all Ramanujan's. And through that, they come up with a precise formula for the number of partitions of any counting number, no matter what the number. Precise formula. That is a profound achievement, just enough to forever make Ramanujan immortal and great. But that's just one of the things. He was doing so many other things. Now, here's where I come back to this story of, had Ramanujan visited Delhi University while I was Vice Chancellor, my rules and regulations would have prevented me from doing anything for him. What does Cambridge do? Here is a man who doesn't even have the +2 of high school. He doesn't have that degree. But in 1916, Cambridge awards him a PhD straight. You know, the history of Western universities is replete with such things. You look at the life of Israel Gelfond, that's exactly what happened. He was serving as a doorman at an institute in the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he was discovered over there as a genius and enrolled straight into a doctoral program. If you look at Banach in Poland, that's how it happened. He had passed high school, had no education beyond that, and Steinhaus discovers him in a park talking mathematics with another friend, and he is curious and he talks to him and he discovers that this man is a genius, and Banach is enrolled straight into a PhD program. They don't ask, do you have NET? Do you have GRF? Have you done this? Have you done that? And there are stories in recent times of mathematicians in Western universities who are straight away given access to doctoral programs. That's what they did with Ramanujan. They don't even enroll him. They just give him a PhD degree. It wasn't called a PhD degree, but it was the equivalent of a PhD. And 2 or 3 years later, they christened it as a regular PhD degree. And that's what they awarded Ramanujan. While even today, I cannot do that were he to come to me. I want the young to think about this. Well, Ramanujan was also a little homesick. He was missing his wife. He used to write regularly to his mother and to his wife. And once he wrote to his father also. He was never very close to his father. Every time he received letters in return from his mother, and he would ask his mother, why is Janaki not responding? But there would never be any answer from his mother. And this was working on Ramanujan's mind. Actually, Ramanujan's mother was keeping Ramanujan's letters away from his wife. The ones he was writing to his wife were not shown to her. Things were working against him. His exertions and other things also all accumulated. The cold accumulated, and he fell seriously ill. There's a long story over here. Eventually, Hardy realized that he is very ill and may not survive. And so in 1919, he returns to Kumbakonam, knowing that he is gravely ill. And I want to tell you something. In his birth centenary year, I read an article in Tamil written by Janaki, who was alive then. This is 1987. Janaki writes over there that when Ramanujan came back, he knew he's not going to survive for too long. Janaki writes that he was very good at astrology. I'm not trying to say that astrology is a science or is not a science. I'm just telling you the story and keep it at that level only. But this is exactly what Janaki writes, that he was very good at astrology and that he had calculated his exact date of demise. And he had told his mother and Janaki, there is no use worrying over me. I will die on this date. And he had resigned himself to that. And he continued working on mathematics in spite of all that. I want you to think about this. Here is a man who now knows that his days are numbered and he's just 31, 32 years of age. but he doesn't give up his devotion to mathematics. Sahib mera ek hai duja kahan. He is completely immersed in mathematics. I want you to think about this. I also want you to know this other part of his life. Now he's largely confined to his bed. And there is a certain intimacy and a certain sensitivity and a good relationship that blossoms between Janki and Ramanujan. He likes watching her lying in bed. When she comes out and oils her hair, he likes to watch her. He talks to her. He tells her that he would like to do this for her. He would like to buy jewelry for her. He talks like that. Here is a man who is sensitive towards his wife, who his major part of his life has been deprived from all these pleasures of marital bliss. And there is so much tragedy in there. But Ramanujan does not give up mathematics. I want you to know one more thing, and this is something the young must imbibe, that at that stage in life, when he had returned, he was famous. People had recognized that this is a genius of the highest order. Hardy wrote that he was comparable to the greatest. When he allots scores to people, it's from a scale of 1 to 100. Hardy puts Ramanujan at 100 and himself at 20, and Littlewood at 25, and Hilbert at 80. Now you can understand what he thought of Ramanujan. He is born once in many, many, many centuries. And the British government was generous enough to sanction a very handsome salary for Ramanujan. And look, what does Ramanujan do? Now here is a man who knows he's going to die. Here is a man who knows that his wife, his parents, his brother are poor, have no income, are solely dependent on him. And yet this great son of Mother India writes to the British and says, I do not need this money. A major part may be given away to needy and talented students. And Ramanujan continued his mathematics till hours before his death, when he lost consciousness and the slate slipped from his hand. But his spirit lives on. And we owe much to that spirit. And I want to mention just two things before I end my lecture. One, that we must understand, each one of us, particularly the young, that you come up in a system, you realize you are indebted. And if you want to do something to recharge your nation, to recharge your society, you must discharge your debts and obligations that have allowed you to come. This great son of Mother India knew this. That's why he put away that scholarship for poor and needy students. Did that make a difference? Yes. His wife suffered immensely after his death. Eventually, she was eking out a living as a seamstress. She was called Tailor Janki in her neighborhood. Much later, in the early 80s, Suresh Ram Bhai, a man who had studied mathematics and was a Gandhian, went, when he was writing a biography of Ramanujan in Hindi, he saw what was happening to his wife. And there were others, Western mathematicians, who discovered how badly off she was. This was brought to the attention of the Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi. And finally, she sanctioned a salary for her. And so her last days were spent in a little bit of comfort. But look what we did all those years after independence. No one cared for Janki. This Janki, whose husband had sacrificed his salary for the welfare of the young and needy and talented. That Janki was neglected in this age. Remember, that was also Ram, and that was a Janki in that age, and this was also Ram, connected to Ram and a Janki, and look what happened. I want you to think about this. Society must be aware of its heroes. Bhagat Singh's mother was neglected for decades after his death. We have to understand that if we don't do this, if we don't care for such people, we do not discharge our debts and we fail ourselves, our souls, and our societies. So I want you to think about that. The other thing I want the young to understand, that it wasn't just that he was the great mathematician that India produced, comparable to the greatest the world had ever produced. That's fine. But there was something else that was even greater than that. I have read the works, the biographies, and spoken to senior mathematicians who were my father's teachers. And all of them have said, not just mathematicians, many scientists, many people have said that, Ramanujan was the first one who gave us the confidence, the belief that not only could we match the British, but we could even do better than them. And there are so many great scientists who follow in his wake, not just in mathematics, who do great things just after the time of Ramanujan. That is also one of his great contributions. And Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, in his autobiography, the man who won the Nobel Prize in Physics, writes that when he was a student at Madras during British rule and Ramanujan's name had already become famous, he said, we were a demoralized nation. The British yoke was upon us. Yet as youth, he said, there were 4 names that inspired us: Mahatma Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore, Jawaharlal Nehru, and Srinivasa Ramanujan. That is the legacy, and that is the triumph of Ramanujan in spite of all the tragedies. And that is what I wanted to convey to the young today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful talk. I think we all got moved with such touching, the way you told about his life. It was so touching and very nicely you have narrated it, sir. I think this has got embossed on our hearts and minds so much that even if we try to forget it, we'll never be able to.
Thank you.
पर्सनली स्पीकिंग, मुझे लगता है अगर मैं आपकी स्टूडेंट रही होती तो मुझे सारी आपकी जो भी आप पढ़ाते इसी तरह एम्बॉस हो जाता, कभी नहीं भूलती मैं. Really wonderful. Really, I'm short of words, sir. It's very.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks a ton for telling us all these things about Ramanujan's life and tragedy so nicely, so beautifully put up, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello, Vanita ma'am, you can invite questions. Kuch,
Yeah.
Any discussion?
Any questions from audience? Any questions you want to ask or anything you want to discuss with sir regarding all this, regarding Ramanujan's life and tragedy? Very interesting and nice facts and very beautifully narrated, I think. So I don't think there are any questions.
Any discussion or anything?
Sir, one thing I wanted to ask you was that, okay, his in the later stage of his life, he wanted to see his wife dressing up and all, and of course he was, in spite of all that, he was dedicated to his work and all. And what about his mother's role?
Yeah, so he was very resentful of his mother towards the last days of his life. She would still interfere. She wanted to send Janki away to Janki's mother's home.
In spite of knowing that he's going to die soon and all.
Yeah. Ramanujan's mother knew he's going to die. She had on her own taken his, birth chart to some famous astrologer and didn't tell her who the man is. And the astrologer said, whoever this is will die soon. So she knew everything. Of course, he was seriously ill. You could tell he's badly ill. But she wanted to send Janki away. That is the unfortunate part, because otherwise she was very devoted to Ramanujan. She was very devoted. But these are one of the great tragedies of human nature.
Yes, sir. Yes.
There is Mr. Aryan Nain who wants to ask something. So, Mr. Aryan, you are unmuted now.
Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Sir, I want to ask that what the thing is that you have learned and applied in your life from Ramanujan's life?
Well, I mean, like everyone else, for one thing, he really inspired all of us, people like me. For us, we treat him as a god. And every time I think of him, I derive some strength. It makes me feel better, gives me some new energy. And that's the main thing that I've derived from Ramanujan's life.
Professor Rajni Balla, ma'am.
Yes. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
lecture is very impressive. We always appreciate your lectures. I just want to know in which classes are his discoveries being taught?
So that's interesting. I am not sure if they teach much of his stuff at the undergraduate level. I used to teach when I was teaching at St. Stephen's College. I used to teach a course on number theory because it was a favorite topic of mine. And as an undergraduate, when I was a student, I had done something which and discovered it. Later, I discovered that Ramanujan had also discovered it. And in Ribbenboim's work on fundamentals of prime number theory, my work and Ramanujan's name appear together on the same page. So that is my connection. I used to tell my students about that. But there was no, you see, his maths is easy to at least grasp in terms of the statement, the partitions of this, or even the prime number theorem, but very hard to prove. It's very, very hard to prove. It requires hard analysis. And his imagination was awesome. I mean, Hardy and Littlewood used to spend so much time just to keep pace with his imagination. Once Hardy, Littlewood, and Ramanujan were working on an inequality, and they needed a constant. And as soon as the inequality was derived, they knew they needed a constant. Ramanujan looked at it and said pi by 4, just like that. And Hardy asked him, how do you know? I said, I know it's pi by 4. And Hardy writes in his own words that it took him and Littlewood 2 full days of hard work to prove it was pi by 4. So, his mind could just go beyond the ordinary. He was a god, make no mistake, he was a god.
Sir, there is a suggestion, if it can be implemented, being from India, Ramanujan, if we want that people and the new students, they get inspired by him, can we introduce some part or just an introduction of his work in school level, or at least up to classes 11th or 12th, or in undergraduate courses, just to inspire Indian students?
I do 2 things, I make school children play around with partitions of numbers and they start discovering things on their own. The other thing I do is, in a very modest way, but last time when I did it, it went beyond Delhi. I organized what I call is a Ramanujan competition for school children, different age groups, and several hundred students took part last time. And you don't have to prepare for the competition. There is no memorizing, no tutoring, nothing. It is based on simple mathematical, arithmetical ingenuity. So you don't have to worry about being prepared for it or anything like that. And we encourage children to take part in it. So it is working. I noticed that, and then people who do well, who get a reasonably high score, we certify them as potential Ramanujans. Of course, we can never say this is a Ramanujan. I will never do that. But we call them potential Ramanujans.
Thank you, sir. Sir, just one thing, there are students from various colleges from Haryana also, other than university level, undergraduate students. And I have seen some of them, they are with their video on listening to you very carefully. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
May I say something?
Yes, please.
Ramanujan did publish some of his results before going to Britain.
Yeah, in the Indian Journal of the Indian Math Society.
And also
it there. Yeah.
And also the math student.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Those results are certainly within the reach of our undergraduates to understand. And they can certainly be publicized a lot. Some of them are certainly of the level that our undergraduates or master students can easily follow. They are brilliant results and they can be passed on to our students at that stage.
I agree with you. Some simple parts of partition theory also, and also his work on Bertrand's postulate, those things are accessible. But I'll tell you an experiment I ran, Professor Pasi, with some school children at one of Delhi's well-known schools many years ago, about 10 years ago. I picked up 5 students and I told them to just write. They were very good at coding and were well-oriented in mathematics. The 12th grade students, 5 of them. I said, can you write a code that will give you an easy, quick way of counting the number of primes in any number between 1 and any number n. Just the prime number, the counting of counting of prime numbers, pi n. And they did that in no time. In a week's time, they came back to me and they had generated a perfect thing. Then I told them to plot the graph. And then I said, I gave them a library of functions, all on the computer. And I said, now let me see if you can match this graph against these combinations of various functions from this library of functions. And in about 10 days, they had discovered the statement of the prime number theorem.
Great.
And I'll tell you something, Professor Parsi, Littlewood writes, Ramanujan's work, his proof of the prime number theorem is incorrect. It has a gap because of his ignorance of the Riemann zeta functions zeros. That's basic graduate course in complex analysis. If he had known that, he would have given a full and correct proof. But Littlewood writes that the fact that sitting in Kumbakonam and Madras alone, he discovered the statement of the prime number theorem by himself is enough to rank him amongst the first rank mathematicians of the world. That was the power of Ramanujan. All this can be easily done. I did this at the level of schools.
You see, his BSc honors by thesis, the title of that is Highly Composite Numbers, and that's published as a paper in the Proceedings of the London Math Society. I'm sure that our students would be very much excited about learning what are composite numbers and how you can come up with computing them and so on.
Yeah, I'm sure of that. I'm sure of that.
So the answer to the question that's being asked is that can some of his work be propagated at the undergraduate and master's level? The answer is yes, and we need to do a little work for that.
Actually, Punjab University should take the lead. It's been a center of number theory for so long, man, a first-rate center.
I hope the number theorists at Punjab University are listening. Thank you very much. It was a great lecture.
Thank you. Thank you. I can see that Professor Andrews has logged in. I want him to know that Professor Andrews, I used to teach number theory at the undergraduate level at Delhi University, and I had an autographed copy of your book. You had left it for me while I was abroad finishing my PhD. When I returned, I found that book and I have it till today. And
Glad to hear it.
That book is a treasure in my library.
Well, thank you.
Yes, welcome, Professor George Andrews. Very good morning at your place and a good evening at our place, sir.
Yes, good evening indeed.
Very warm welcome to you.
Thank you.
Now I request Professor A.K. Agarwal to introduce Professor George Andrews and chair his session. Professor Agarwal, please introduce Professor George Andrews and chair his session. Over to Professor A.K. Agarwal.
Professor Agarwal, please unmute yourself. Yes, now, please.
So I said good evening to all participants and good morning to Professor Andrews.
Good morning, Ashok.
So it is my pleasure to introduce Professor Andrews today. He is going to speak on the topic what Ramanujan may have thought of mock theta functions. And before I invite him to deliver his talk, I would like to say a few things about him. He is a leading expert in the theory of integer partitions and Q geometric series. And he did his PhD from Pennsylvania University in Philadelphia with Professor Rademacher. Rademacher's name is also associated with Ramanujan's name. Ramanujan discovered one formula for exact formula to compute the value of Pn, the partition function, but that formula was in error. So that was corrected by Hardy and Rademacher. So that final formula is known as Hardy-Ramanujan-Rademacher formula. And he was the supervisor of Professor Andrews. He did PhD with him. He is an emeritus professor at Pennsylvania State University, and his work in number theory and combinatorics have led to many important applications in physics. In the year 1998, he was an invited speaker at ICM, which was held in Berlin. And in 1997, he was elected as Fellow of the Academy of Arts and Sciences. And in 2003, he was elected a member of the National Academy of Sciences. He was president of the American Mathematical Society during 2008 and 9. He has guided more than 20 research scholars, PhD students, and he was my supervisor also when I pursued my postdoctoral research at the Pennsylvania State University after completing my PhD from IIT Delhi. Then he was my supervisor at the Penn State University. I also took one course, advanced number theory course from him, and I found him a very great teacher. In fact, this was his course which made me a fan of partition theory forever. And since then, I am working in partition theory only, and the credit goes to him and to this course which I took from him. Now, he has collaborated several mathematicians around the globe, and we have also published 4 joint papers. I have 4 papers with him. And with Professor Bruce Bund, he has written 5 volumes of the Ramanujan's Lost Notebooks, covering all the important areas in which Ramanujan worked. They have written 5 volumes on Ramanujan's Lost Notebook. And his book on partition theory is a standard reference, and I think it has the maximum number of citations in the history of mathematics. So with these words, I invite Professor Andrews to deliver his talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashok. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Professor Verma for taking care of the logistics. And so what I need to do now is to attempt to share my screen. So I will see how that works. It is always something of a mystery as to whether it is going to work or not. All right, it looks like it's on its way. Excellent. So the title of my talk is, I see that the response is slow on the screen. In other words, maybe so the little image that you see there is no longer on my screen. So I think I will stop sharing and try to do this again to see if that helps. All right. Much better. Okay. How Ramanujan may have discovered the Mach theta functions. So the first thing I want to do now that I now that I have the title on the screen, I'm going to switch screens and bring up a different screen. I hope it is this one. If it isn't, it will be one of the others. That doesn't look right. Let me try something else, and let's try this. I'm sorry, that seems to be. Oops. Everything goes so slowly. All right, here is what I want to bring up, I hope. Ah, good. So let's see if. So here we see the original letter from Ramanujan to Hardy. And the most important thing on the screen are equations A and B, because these are classical representations related to A is related to the generating function for partitions, the 1 over the Dedekind eta function, effectively, if you're thinking in terms of modular forms, and B is the series related to the Rogers-Ramanujan identities. And what Ramanujan is thinking about is the idea that each of these expressions has a very nice form, nice asymptotic form near the unit circle. And he describes it where
Professor Andrews, your screen is not visible at the moment.
Is not visible?
No, it's just blank, dark blank.
Is that any better?
No, not yet.
Well, so I will describe what's basically on the screen. Basically on the screen in the letter, the Ramanujan is saying that classical Eulerian series, as he calls them, have very neat and closed forms in terms of their asymptotic behavior near the unit circle. He goes on to say that many other such series do not have such forms, but that he has discovered functions which are not like the classical theta functions or modular forms, but nonetheless have such neat interpretations. So rather than sharing a foggy screen, I think I will leave it with that, and hopefully I can go back to my iPad and it will respond accordingly. All right, I hope that is clear.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, good. So basically, what Ramanujan was talking about are a series of I will put down his A series that I showed you on the screen from his last letter, which is of this form. And the way that these symbols are used, I will need to use them just for convenience. So this series is equal to this famous infinite product of Euler, and basically this is one of the fundamental identities. I believe that this is probably due to Jacobi. Hardy and Ramanujan attribute it to Euler, but I don't think it is in Euler's works. Anyway, it's a very old formula, and it was one that was cited by Hardy and Ramanujan in the paper that Professor Agarwal mentioned when he was introducing me, so that Ramanujan was quite familiar with this series. But the real question is, the question that one might naturally ask is, why would he think that there were other functions other than the classical modular forms, which had been fully developed by the time Ramanujan was thinking about these questions? Why would he think that other series would be like this, especially when, if you randomly write down such a series, it almost always is ill-behaved near the unit circle. It is not anything like one of these classical forms. The forms that actually produce these nice results are very rare. And yet Ramanujan, in his last letter to Hardy, lists, I think, probably 17 of them. So where did he get the idea that such things might exist? And so this morning, what I would like to do is to try to suggest to you how he might have done this. So the first thing we need to do is to talk a little bit about what is called the Lost Notebook. The Lost Notebook, I don't have time this morning to go into the history of this fascinating document, but suffice it to say that the Lost Notebook consists of the notes and discoveries that Ramanujan made in the last year of his life when he was convalescing in India and in 1919, 1920. And in this notebook, you'll find a number of formulas that are connected with what is called the Heine Transformation. So Heine is the first one to really look at series of this nature where you have this sort of product involved. And Heine proved the following result. If I define, let me be more careful. Suppose I look at this series as equal to the summation n greater than or equal to 0 of a q n b q n t to the n over q q n c q n. So this is sort of a Q analog of the classical hypergeometric series, often called the Q hypergeometric series. Heine proved the following result. This is equal to B Q infinity, A T Q infinity, divided by C Q infinity, T Q infinity, and phi of C over B, B, C, Q, and B. So the question was, how is it possible that, how does one go about proving something like this, which seems at the face of it rather difficult? And the answer is, it relies on a much simpler formula called the Q Binomial Series. And so let me put that down here. There is this series, where basically it's the above series with B equal to C, so that term cancels out. And this is equal to A T Q infinity divided by T Q infinity. It is what is called the Q analog of the binomial series, so that it is very easy to prove by looking at a functional equation, expanding the infinite product and looking at a functional equation for the infinite product, and then just seeing what this function expands into as a power series in T. So this is a very familiar formula in this area, and it is one that Ramanujan would have been very well aware of. And now here is how one proves the Heine transformation. Here, this phi of A, B, C, Q, and T. What is utilized here is a method that Ramanujan was very much familiar with, namely if you see something like this, you can actually write this as a quotient of two infinite products. Namely, it's BQ infinity divided by BQ to the n Q infinity. And you can do that because both infinite products run from j equals 0 to infinity of 1 minus BQ to the j. And the product in the denominator starts canceling out all the entries in the numerator once you get to BQ to the n. So the only things left in the numerator are the first n factors, and that is what constitutes this left-hand side. And so this expression here is equal to summation n greater than or equal to 0. He leaves the first two terms the same, leaves the t there and the q sub n, and he replaces the bn and the cn by these quotients of infinite products. So you get bq infinity over bq to the n infinity, and you have cq to the n infinity now in the numerator, and CQ infinity in the denominator. What happens is that you factor out this BQ infinity, CQ infinity, and you're left with, well, the sum n greater than or equal to 0 of A Q sub n t to the n over Q sub n. And now look at this expression right here. That is a quotient like we see in Cauchy's Q binomial theorem. And so what you do is to expand this product right here, utilizing the Cauchy theorem. And so you have the summation m greater than or equal to 0 of C over B semicolon Q sub m, B to the m, Q to the m n divided by Q sub m. And now you interchange the order of summation. I won't give you what constraints on the parameters are necessary to do this. I will note that that is easy to make these series both absolutely convergent so that the interchange of summation is not problematic analytically. And so I bring out everything that involves m and doesn't involve m. And now I say, look at the series involving n. It is this together with this term right here. And so what you're going to get is a t q to the m q infinity divided by t q to the m infinity is again from the same Q binomial series that we have used once before. And now you decouple things. You replace this infinite product by the quotient of this infinite product divided by that finite product. And so you're going to get BQ infinity. The ATQ infinity comes out front. You have CQ infinity. The TQ infinity comes out front, and you're left with the summation m greater than or equal to 0, C over B Q sub m, TQ sub m, B to the m, divided by QQ sub m, and ATQ sub m. And this is precisely the formula that we talked about earlier. So what has happened is that you have had two applications of this expression, and you are able to do this transformation. The thing I want to say next is that the Lost Notebook has numerous instances of this technique. Actually, Ramanujan, at least in the Lost Notebook, did not specifically write down the formula of Heine, but he wrote down a number of other formulas where the method of proof is precisely the one that you see here in this classical instance. And now I want to return to A, all right? So this is a formula that Ramanujan was very interested in. As I say, it appears in the sort of the prologue of the paper on the exact formula for P of n, probably the most famous paper of the joint paper of Hardy and Ramanujan. But they make an initial discussion of how you might go about doing asymptotics. And one of the things they spend a fair amount of time on is this series. And one of the things that Ramanujan might well have asked himself is, can I do anything with the method that you just saw to prove anything about this series? In other words, let me start with this series and let me explore it using the methods that I've just shown you as how do you prove Heine's theorem. Well, you might say, suppose he started like this, equals summation n greater than or equal to 0, q to the n squared over q sub n. And then he would rewrite the next thing as q infinity, and q to the n plus 1, q infinity. The problem with expanding anything, sorry, that often happens when I'm using this. The problem with expanding this is that he has nowhere to go with this. This is not something he can, there's no way to expand that. And so that was not a great idea. Since it's not a great idea, let me get it off the screen. So what might be a great idea? Well, what he needs in order to make this work is he needs, let me take that out as well. Let me cite. I don't fully understand how this works, obviously. So let me note there are two special cases of the Q binomial series that Ramanujan will be using. One is this, the summation n greater than or equal to 0 of q to the n squared t to the n over q squared sub n equals minus t q squared infinity, and summation m greater than or equal to 0 of t to the m over q sub m equals 1 over t q infinity. So those are two corollaries of this Q binomial series going back to Cauchy. And so the idea of just separating out one of these doesn't get you anywhere. But if when you see the q to the n squared there and the q to the n squared there, what would happen if he got a q to the n squared in the denominator? So q to the n squared. So let me rewrite this in a special way because I want you to see what's actually going on. All I've done is to put an extra product like this in both the numerator and denominator. And now I say, these two things join together by the fact that 1 minus x squared times 1 plus x squared, 1 minus x times 1 plus x is 1 minus x squared. So those two things grow together to leave me with q to the n squared over q squared sub n. And now I can play the same product game that I did with the previous case, namely, this is minus q to the n plus 1 q infinity, and this is q to the n plus 1 q infinity divided by q infinity. So I've replaced the finite products in this with infinite products, and I've joined these two things together to be this. And why would Ramanujan have done that? Because he was vividly aware of this, and this will allow him to do a sum once he expands this using the Q binomial series. And so this becomes, let's bring out the infinite products that are free of the index. Summation n greater than or equal to 0 of q to the n squared over q squared sub n. Summation m greater than or equal to 0 of, well, now the quotient of these two things, sorry about that. The quotient of these two things gives you a -1 q sub m. The variable is minus q to the n plus 1 raised to the mth power, and this is q sub m. And now he can proceed exactly as one did in dealing with Heine, except of course he will use this corollary of Heine's theorem, of Cauchy's Q binomial theorem, in order to sum the n sum. So we bring the m's out front, and we have -1 to the m, q to the m, over n -1 semicolon q sub m, divided by q sub m. And then the n sum becomes, there's a button on this that I lean my fist on and it always moves the screen up. So I will try to, oh dear. All right, so what do I have now? I have the n sum becomes minus q to the 1 plus m, semicolon q infinity. And now Ramanujan is facing a problem, because this infinite product heavily depends, on base q squared, because the variable is q squared. Ramanujan is facing a problem here, because this infinite product has a very different behavior depending on the parity of m. In other words, if m is even, this is running through all of the odd numbers greater than or equal to m plus 1. If m is odd, it's running through all the even numbers greater than or equal to m plus 1. And so in order to proceed here in a way to allow you to factor this product out of this series, in order to continue with this method, what you must do is to split this series into even terms and odd terms. So here we go with this. We are now going to split the series into even terms and odd terms. Summation m greater than or equal to 0. If m is even, -1 to the m disappears. And so I have 2m -1 semicolon q sub 2m, q sub 2m, times, well, this will be minus q to the 1 plus 2m, which we can rewrite as minus q squared infinity, divided by minus q to the 2m plus, sorry, I'm saying this wrong. We need to cancel out the first 2m terms, and so we need this. And so this is equal to that when m is even. Now we need to put in the sum when m is odd. So now the -1 to the m is always minus, so we bring the minus out front. Q to the 2m plus 1, -1 semicolon q sub 2m plus 1, divided by q sub 2m plus 1. And now these are, m is 2m plus 1, so the exponents are now all even. So we have minus q squared sub m, and we need to cancel out the first m of these. Sorry, this is infinity, and this is the finite product that cancels out the things in the numerator. All right, so many of you are thinking now that Ramanujan is going on a truly wild goose chase because most of us operate on the principle of entropy. In other words, when things get simpler, we feel that we are headed in the right direction. And I would point out too that where we started out was from this lovely simple series, and we now have complicated into this massive expression. Fortunately, however, Ramanujan was undeterred, and so he now proceeds as follows. We still have the same infinite product out front. You have this free infinite product coming out of the numerator. You have the summation over m greater than or equal to 0. And I'm going to split up the numerator into two expressions. Namely, since this goes up to 2m on base q, I'm going to split it into the even exponents and the odd exponents. So the even exponents will go like this. There will be m of them. And the odd exponents will go like this. There will be m of those. And in the denominator, I will have q sub 2m and minus q squared sub m. And the same thing happens over here. Namely, I have minus q squared comes out front. And I have the summation of m greater than or equal to 0, q to the 2m plus 1. I have minus 1 semicolon q. This lasts one more term because of the 2m plus 1. And I have minus q squared minus, yes, let me revise this. The minus 1 out front really just comes out as a 2, and that leaves me with m terms like this. And then there's the odd terms like this. And the denominator is q sub 2m plus 1 and minus q squared mm. And now I hope that everybody can see that something neat has happened. Namely, this term is the same as that one, and this term is the same as that one. Okay? So let me isolate now what happens with this, because the thing gets sufficiently technical that I want to at least go partially to the end series that Ramanujan would actually come up with, so that you can see precisely what's happening. So let us now just look at summation m greater than or equal to 0. Q to the 2m minus 1 q squared sub m over q squared sub m and q squared sub m. All right. I have taken the denominator product and split it into even exponents and odd exponents. And now this actually is an instance of the Heine transformation. However, I want to show it's a sufficiently intricate thing that I want to show you what happens with regard to this. So I'm going to now proceed in precisely the way I did before. If I were to do out everything in detail, I would focus on the next thing I would deal with would be this second series, but I want to just concentrate on this one right now. So this is q to the 2m minus 1 semicolon q squared sub m divided by q squared sub m. And now I have q to the 2m plus 1 semicolon q squared infinity divided by q squared infinity. And so this is equal to 1 over q squared infinity summation m greater than or equal to 0 of q to the 2m minus 1 q squared sub m q squared sub m. And this is the summation n greater than or equal to 0 minus 1 to the n, q to the n squared plus 2mn divided by q squared sub n. Again, this is an instance of this series right there. And so I now will bring that sum out front. So I have 1 over q squared infinity summation n greater than or equal to 0 minus 1 to the n q to the n squared over q squared sub n. And now what happens? What happens is that the m sum is an instance of the Q binomial series. And so the m sum is minus q to the 2n plus 2 semicolon q squared infinity divided by q to the 2n plus 2 semicolon q squared infinity. And now something absolutely magical has happened. The denominator, which looks like it depends on n, does not, because the denominator itself is just this. Wait a minute. Yeah, no, that's right. The denominator is just that. And so you bring that then leaves the sum. So I'm going to bring out the numerator. I won't simplify this anymore, although I could easily. And the summation n greater than or equal to 0 of minus 1 to the n q to the n squared divided by minus q squared sub n. And so he's finally wound up with a fairly nice expression. There are a bunch of infinite products that he must actually move around. And rather than spending too much more time on this, I want to move. So this is one of his third order functions, which Bruce Barrett and I, in our edited version of the Lost Notebook, wrote as phi3 of Q, because it's one of the third order Mach theta functions. Ramanujan uses the symbol phi a lot for different things, and we wanted to make sure we specified this. If we go back to the odd sum, namely, what I mean by the odd sum is this, we will obtain by the same means a bunch of products times the summation n greater than or equal to 1 of q to the n squared minus 1 to the n divided by minus q. Sorry, this is not phi of q, this is phi3 of minus q. And this is what Ramanujan would call psi. We put a 3 in it like this. And simplifying everything, Ramanujan would have obtained minus q infinity. This is now simplifying and multiplying through by all the infinite products to get them all on the left-hand side, equal phi3 of minus q plus twice psi 3 of minus q equals, I'll write them out so you can see them again, minus 1 to the n q to the n squared over minus q squared sub n plus twice the summation n greater than or equal to 1 of minus 1 to the n q to the n squared over minus q semicolon q squared sub n. So surprisingly, the seemingly Baroque, if not Rococo, machinations that we've gone through produces this rather simple formula, namely that this infinite product is equal to these two things. A rather nice observation, but Ramanujan, I believe, would have been absolutely struck by this because, so what happens, say, near q equal minus 1? Near q equal minus 1, all of the factors in the denominator there tend to 2. So the first series, as q tends to minus 1 through real numbers, I'll say put it real. The first series converges to summation n greater than or equal to 0 of minus 1 to the n over 2 to the n. In other words, and you can make this rigorous. I'm not suggesting that you just set q equal to a value on the border or the boundary of the analyticity of this function, and the unit circle is the boundary of analyticity. But I'm saying that a very straightforward analytic argument will convince you of this. It seems obvious in looking at it, and Ramanujan would have seen this immediately. But the second series is singular for each term. In other words, it is blowing up exponentially. What is it blowing up exponentially like? It has to be blowing up exponentially like this thing, which is a modular form. Indeed, it's a quotient of quotient of products of Dedekind eta functions. In other words, this thing is behaving like a modular form at q equal minus 1. But you see now, as Ramanujan would have seen, that this behaves asymptotically at what one might call the odd roots of unity, where the denominators all blow up here, this will be quite different, say, at the even roots of unity. In other words, if we go to the square root of -1 or I, then all the factors here blow up and all the factors there remain finite. And one has then this behaving like a modular form half the time, and the other half the time it remains finite. It is my claim, and of course, I'm purely speculating, and I should say that my record on speculating on Ramanujan's thought has over the years has not been good. I have tried to avoid too much speculation about it, but there was one stage when I thought I fully understood a page that he had on continued fractions, because I thought I had found a master continued fraction on another page of the Lost Notebook that implied these results. And so I proudly presented it in that way. And after my talk, the late K.G. Ranganathan came up to me and said, well, you might be right, but on the other hand, there's a much more natural way of doing those continued fractions, which Atlee Selberg published, and that would be a more natural explanation than the formula that you extracted from a quite different page of the Lost Notebook, which made me think, well, maybe I wasn't right on that. And of course, maybe I'm not right on this. But I do point out that the methods that I've used to get from the original series of Jacobi to this nice expression here, the methods that used were precisely those that Ramanujan was extremely familiar with, because we see them in various formulas in the Lost Notebook, which have to be proved by the Heine method. There really isn't an alternative way of doing it, so that he was familiar with this method, and this is what turns up. There is a little more to the story. I do want to, I realize there's a large audience and I do want to leave time to answer questions, but I do want to suggest how things might flesh out from here. In other words, Ramanujan's mind was filled with curiosity about how things worked. And once he had seen something like this, it would not at all be surprising for him to think maybe there are more things like this. In other words, he has seen both of these functions, which are both listed in his last letter to Hardy. He's seen both these functions arise from trying to use Heine's methods on the Jacobi series for the generating function for P of n. He would think, well, wait a minute. Suppose instead of this, I started with this. I'll put in a minus sign. The thing that would happen is that you would have, instead of, if I'd introduce a minus sign here, and I should wipe out these minus signs, everything would go on as before. The only thing that would happen is that basically you get a bunch of change of sign, and he would wind up with what we call F3 of Q, which is this series right here. Bruce Barrett and I call F3 of Q. Ramanujan, when I've used the subscript 3 is the only difference. F3 of Q equals psi of minus Q minus twice psi 3 of minus Q. And he's off to the races in terms of now getting all of these functions in terms of things that behave well near the unit circle at about half the time, and the other half the time they blow up like classical theta functions, or as we would term them now, modular forms. one more thing. I've concentrated on the series A that Ramanujan listed in his letter to Hardy, but there was the series B, which can be written this way. And this is equal to 1 over q to the 5th infinity, q to the 4th, q to the 5th infinity. So on the right-hand side, you see the appearance of this standard infinite product, which can easily be shown to be another modular form. And thus, this is the first Rogers-Ramanujan identity. And what Ramanujan does is to say, my goodness, if I do the summation n equals 0 to infinity of q to the n squared over minus q sub n, I can relate it to, I can proceed as follows. And you see that we're off to the races now. You start on with exactly the same idea in mind, replace this by the infinite product, q sub infinity over q to the n plus 1, q infinity. And the same procedure goes, and this leads to the 5th order Mach theta functions. So that you can almost complete the letter of Ramanujan to Hardy just by starting to think about how I would deal with the Jacobi series. The last 3 lines of the letter to Hardy are still somewhat mysterious in that he writes down 3 more series. He says these are the 7th order Mach theta functions, and they are not related to one another. So he makes no assertion about them except to name them 7th order Mach theta functions. And so they have also provided a mystery that has come into understanding in recent years. All right, so as summary, what I hope I've shown you is that there are elementary means that Ramanujan was very familiar with that would lead him to an expression relating series that to his eye, as he looked at them, he would see that there is this very disparate behavior depending on whether Q is close to an even root of unity or an odd root of unity, that these functions are behaving unlike anything he had seen before, and that is what set him on the trail and eventually led him to send this long last letter to Hardy defining what he called Mach theta functions and as he said, sending along with this some examples. So you've seen some of the examples this morning. I don't know whether I've convinced you or not that this is Ramanujan's way of seeing things. I once gave a talk on how valuable it is to try to think about how Ramanujan might have thought of things, not necessarily because we will actually replicate his thoughts, but because we may well discover things that are part of the treasure trove that Ramanujan has left us. So thank you all for your attention. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Professor Andrews, for your excellent talk. And if the participants have any question, they can ask now. Any question or comment?
Apparently not.
Okay. So now over to
It's
Professor.
early in the morning for me and late in the evening for you.
Okay, thank you.
So there is a question in the chat box, Professor Agarwal.
Okay. So let's see if I can bring up the chat. So there it says, Srinivasa Raghava, I have a question. What is the question?
I think Atul Dikshit asked the question. So Atul, maybe you can ask directly.
Participants can raise their hand option in the Zoom window to ask any questions so that we may unmute you all. You can raise your hand in the Zoom window. There is an option of raising hand. So we can unmute you. Any participant want to ask something, please.
So Atul Dixon has a message. I am unable to unmute myself. Could it be possible that, here's Atul's question. Could it be possible this leads to an explanation of the order of a Mach theta function? So Ramanujan had 3 orders, 3, 5, and 7. So the answer to that is I think problematic in that I believe that he's thinking of 3rd order as related to basically the Dedekind eta function where the theta expansion has a 3 in the exponent on Q. With regard to the 5th order functions, they're all related to the Rogers-Ramanujan identities, and there's a natural 5 that appears in the theta function expansion of Rogers-Ramanujan. And if you look at classical identities of Rogers that might have suggested the 7th order functions, there are identities related to the number 14, which is of course 2 times 7. So that is the possibility of it. So in some sense, that might be how the order has come up. There really seems to be no reasonable way of defining order. And all I can say is that when I was writing a paper with Dean Hickerson on some of these Mach theta functions, other than these, then argument came up as to whether they should be 4th order or 6th order functions. He said 4th, I said 6th, and I said, I'm the senior member of this team, so we'll go with 6th. So that's not exactly a scientific way of determining the order. And so I would say that the order is a rather amorphous concept, but useful just for putting certain classes of these things together. But it's not much more than that.
Mr. Srinivasa Raghav wants to ask something.
Yes.
Srinivasa Raghav, you are unmuted now.
Hello, Professor Andrews. Good evening.
Yes. Good evening. Good evening.
What an amazing technical talk on Mach theta functions. Very delightful, sir. And I have a non-technical question, sir.
Sure, please.
As we know, Ramanujan had enough training in Cambridge by famous mathematicians like Littlewood and Hardy. Even then, Ramanujan, when he came back to India and writing that last notebook, he never gave any proofs to Mach theta functions or other identities. But he had enough training. What is the reason?
So I wish I knew the answer to that. There are all sorts of things one can think about. He may have, paper was precious, let's put it that way. And so much of the work he did, he probably did on the slate and then would copy the results that he got onto paper. I point out to you that the proofs of the works in the Lost Notebook occupy 5 volumes that Bruce Berndt and I have published. In other words, in a little over 100 pages, of writing formulas down. We have, a few thousand pages devoted to actually proving the results. And so he may have had, so to speak, outlines of proofs that he didn't want to include. It is very unclear. However, I would say I don't know whether he had proofs or not, but I do believe he had clearly in mind what would constitute a proof, because many of the formulas are just, it's impossible to conceive that anybody could have just written them down without having a justification that is quite serious. Some of the things that we've called the 10th order Mach theta functions, the identities for those are incredibly I mean, as brilliant as he was, just guessing these out of thin air, I do believe that he had methods for understanding these that allowed him to see what these formulas were. And probably if one were to make his way of seeing these into a rigorous method, you would have a rigorous proof. Of course, that is pure speculation, but it's not. No one knows the answer to why he did not write down more proofs. We do not know the answer to that.
Professor Andrews, I have a query.
Yes.
Could you please suggest some book to study Mach theta functions from the combinatorial point of view?
Book to study Mach theta functions from a combinatorial point of view. There have been a number of papers on the Mach theta functions. I don't know that if there's a book out by now on the combinatorial aspects of them, I don't know. There are lots of books on the combinatorics of Q series as such, and of course Mach theta functions fall into that category of things. So I many years ago wrote a monograph on Q series, their development in a variety of areas, and that has numerous combinatorial aspects of Q series, and consequently would lead to natural methods connected with Mach theta functions. But really, the truth about Mach theta functions is that it's only really within the last decade or two that we are really starting to understand these functions. For most of the 20th century, especially before the time of the discovery of the Lost Notebook, there was really very little done in this branch of things, so that we're only getting to the stage where we understand some of the combinatorics, and either books are just coming out or will be coming out in the future that I'm sure will deal with that aspect. But I don't know of anything explicitly devoted to the combinatorics of Mach theta functions other than a lot of papers in the literature.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So over to Professor Verma, Vinita Verma.
Thank you, sir. So thank you, Professor George Andrews, for your very interesting talk. And we are on the behalf of the department. I am really grateful to both the speakers for taking out their valuable time, sparing their time for us and giving us interesting talks, and to the audience and all students, all faculty members and my colleagues for attending this and taking out time for the lectures. So we stop here, and tomorrow's session starts at 11:30. So Professor Rekhi Agarwal would enlighten us with his talk at 11:30 tomorrow morning. So we meet at 11:30 tomorrow. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody, and give a big hand.
Thank you. Thank you.